On August 1, 2008, 11 mountaineers tragically lost their lives on K2, the second highest mountain on Earth. The deaths occurred during a harrowing 48-hour period, as climbers attempted a summit push and subsequently descended in dangerous conditions. This became the deadliest single accident in the history of K2 mountaineering. What makes the 2008 disaster particularly haunting is the ongoing debate surrounding some of the specific details of the tragedy. Different plausible scenarios are still discussed today, and many of the survivors' accounts vary, adding layers of uncertainty to the event. K2 is often regarded as more dangerous than Mount Everest. With a height of 8,611 meters, 28,251 feet, it has a reputation for unpredictable weather, steep slopes, and a constant risk of avalanches. Its notorious section, the Bottleneck, is a narrow, steep couloir heavily overhung by massive, unstable seracs, or ice cliffs. Climbers are forced to pass quickly through this section, as falling ice is a constant hazard. Unfortunately, on this fateful day, the Bottleneck would become a deadly trap. The K2 climbing season in 2008 had been plagued by poor weather. For weeks, the mountain remained covered in clouds, and the summit was unattainable for most climbers. By the end of July, the forecast for August 1 showed signs of improvement, and several expedition groups decided to make one last attempt to summit. By July 31, 10 different groups had gathered at the highest camp, Camp 4, located at 7,800 meters, 25,590 feet. This group included climbers from different countries: Americans, French, Norwegians, Serbians, South Koreans, and a Dutch-led international team named Norit. The climbers agreed to join forces for the final summit push on Friday, August 1, as a coordinated effort would increase their chances of success. However, from the start, things began to go wrong. The first major problem occurred early in the ascent. Shaheen Beg, the most experienced Pakistani high-altitude porter, who had previously summited K2, began to suffer from altitude sickness and was forced to turn back. His absence left a significant leadership void. Worse yet, the climbers' support teams made a critical error. The high-altitude porters and Sherpas, responsible for fixing ropes along the route, began setting them up too low and did not extend them to the critical sections of the climb. These poorly placed ropes caused a significant delay, wasting valuable hours that would later prove fatal. By the time the ropes were repositioned correctly, a dangerous traffic jam had formed in the Bottleneck, which would only exacerbate the issues later on. Climbers were forced to move through this section slowly, and what was already a perilous section became even more dangerous as the hours passed. At around 8 a.m., tragedy struck. Dren Mandic, a Serbian climber, unclipped from the fixed rope to pass another climber. Unfortunately, he lost his balance and fell over 100 meters, 328 feet, down the icy slope of the Bottleneck. His body was later recovered, and the rescue mission to recover him was arduous, as the terrain was incredibly treacherous. During the operation, one of the rescuers, Jahan Beg, a French team porter, also lost his footing. For reasons that remain unclear, Beg failed to self-arrest and slid to his death as well. These initial fatalities caused significant delays and confusion, setting the stage for the disaster that would follow. The remaining climbers were now hours behind schedule, and those who had reached the summit were forced to begin their descent in the dark. Some climbers didn't reach the summit until as late as 8 p.m., after nightfall had already settled on the mountain. At around 8:30 p.m., a massive serac, a block of ice, broke off from above the Bottleneck. As it crashed down the mountain, it sliced through all the fixed ropes, effectively stranding dozens of climbers in the death zone, a region above 8,000 meters, 26,247 feet, where oxygen levels are dangerously low. Without the ropes, which had previously provided vital safety, climbers were forced to descend the perilous terrain in complete darkness. Among the climbers trapped in the death zone were Sherpa Pemba Gyalje and several members of the Korean team. Pemba Gyalje, displaying incredible skill and bravery, managed to descend the Bottleneck without the safety of fixed ropes, guiding other climbers to safety. Another Sherpa, Chiring Dorje, also performed a miraculous rescue, descending while carrying a climber named Pang Lama attached to his harness. Despite these heroic efforts, the situation was dire. Climbers, exhausted and disoriented by the altitude, began to bivouac, camp in place, and wait for morning. Among the survivors were the Nora team's leader, Wilco van Rooyen, Irish climber Ger McDonnell, and Italian climber Marco Confortilla. Saturday, August 2nd, brought little relief. The climbers who had survived the night found themselves in an even worse situation. As a rescue mission set out from lower camps, Wilco van Rooyen descended alone, encountering the lifeless bodies of South Korean climbers Kyung Hyo Park, Hyo Jaeung Kim, Dong Jin Hwang, and their Nepali guide, Ger McDonnell. The group had become entangled in ropes after their descent was interrupted by falling ice, and they were still alive, but only just. Van Rooyen, himself suffering from frostbite and altitude sickness, was unable to help them and continued down the mountain. Marco Confortilla and Ger McDonnell later reached the group and worked for hours to untangle the climbers and free them from the ropes. The details surrounding McDonnell's actions are unclear. Confortilla later claimed that McDonnell, suffering from altitude sickness, attempted to climb back up the mountain, possibly in a delusional state. However, Wilco van Rooyen disputes this, suggesting that McDonnell had spent several more hours trying to free the climbers before he was overcome by the extreme conditions. Later that day, another serac fall struck, and a catastrophic avalanche swept through the group. In a final, tragic turn of events, Ger McDonnell, the two remaining South Korean climbers, and one of their rescuers were killed. The death toll had risen to 11, and the mountain's grim tally did not stop there. The fate of a Pakistani porter, Mehrbin Karim, remains uncertain to this day, as he was last seen attempting to descend the mountain, but his body was never recovered. Wilco van Rooyen, now lost and exhausted, survived a second night in the open before being miraculously located and rescued by his teammates on August 3rd. The Pakistani military launched a helicopter operation to evacuate the severely frostbitten survivors, but it was clear that the mountain had claimed its victims. The 11 climbers who lost their lives that day were Dren Mandik, Jahan Beg, Ralph Bey, Hughes Daubereed, Ger McDonnell, Kyung Hyo Park, Hyo Jaeung Kim, Dong Jin Hwang, Ger McDonnell, Mehrbin Karim, Karim Mehrbin. The 2008 K2 disaster remains one of the most devastating events in the history of high-altitude mountaineering. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers posed by the mountain and the fragility of human life in such extreme conditions. K2's brutal nature means that even a small error or delay can result in catastrophic consequences. The tragedy highlighted the importance of preparation, communication, and decision-making in the high-altitude environment, where climbers face not only the risk of death from natural elements, but also from their own limitations. The survivors of the disaster, though they lived, will never forget the harrowing days they spent on the mountain. The story of the 2008 K2 disaster is a sobering reminder that no summit is ever fully conquered, and the mountain, no matter how well prepared the climber may be, always holds the final word.